Today on the Gilbert.K Show, we're joined by a four-time Primetime Emmy-nominated Foley artist whose incredible work at Skywalker Sound has helped bring blockbuster worlds like X-Men '97, Star Wars The Mandalorian, and Grogu, The Punisher One Last Kill, Hoppers, Wonder Man, Zootopia 2, and F1 to life through the power of sound. Get ready to go behind the scenes of Hollywood's biggest productions with one of the industry's most talented sound artists. Let's give a big welcome to the one and only Sean England.
Hey, Sean, how are you today? Pleasure to have you on the show.
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining me. Okay, we're going to start with the childhood and discovering sound. Growing up in Northern California, what's the earliest sound from your childhood that you feel shaped your imagination, the sound that now makes you think, yep, that was the start of a Foley artist in the making?
I'm not sure there was any particular sound or moment. I grew up with my parents working in the film business, so I've been watching movies as early as I can remember. And my dad worked in the music business, and all my parents were music lovers. So I was just constantly around sound and never really considered it one way or another, to be honest. I didn't think too much about pursuing sound in film. More as a musician was my appeal when I was a kid. I really was gravitated towards the drums, and I just love music and sound in general.
So before film sound, you were working as a musician and drummer. When did you realize the rhythm and timing you developed as a musician could become your superpower in Foley?
Well, it's interesting because when I started in the film business, I worked on the technical side, initially working in the machine room, aligning film machines and whatnot, and eventually made my way to the Foley stage as a recordist and a brief stint as a Foley mixer. And it was through that experience that I started to consider it. The artists that were working at the time were very cool and would have me come into the stage occasionally to do something that was hyper rhythmic. If there was a very percussive scene in the movie or something to that effect, they'd have me come in and do it just for fun. And it was very organic, the process. I didn't make any real big decision about it. And I still play drums and I still play in bands. So those things have always just correlated, in a very natural, organic way.
Yeah. So as a kid, were you in a band playing or?
Yeah. I played a little bit in high school band, marching band and that type of thing. And then I started playing in a hard rock band when I was, in high school, and I continued to play music on and off, to this day.
That's amazing. So for anyone watching who has no idea how movie sound works, how do you explain what a Foley artist does? And what's one example from your work that would surprise people? Because the real sound is nothing like what they hear on screen.
Sure. Well, one way to explain Foley is we are creating and performing what I would call everyday sounds. And that's a loose term because every day is going to apply to the world we're in. So if we're in a fantasy world, things like creatures or robots, they're everyday sounds in that world. Obviously, they don't exist in our world. But it could be as simple as a dinner scene where, people are handling forks and knives and plates and eating food and, drinking liquids. We cover all that kind of stuff. The footsteps are the biggest element of Foley in my mind. So we do a lot of very literal sounds, whether or not they exist. But, you see someone walking, you want to hear their feet in that room, in that context. And, we do a lot of abstract things as well, a lot of design or effects type things. So that's really Foley is kind of the human element, so to speak. We're performing, we're acting, we're trying to convey that character, that moment in the film. And ultimately, we're trying to tell the story, from a sound standpoint. But it's very performance based. We watch the picture, We perform to the picture. We act alongside the actor. Again, just to try to ground everything and bring a certain realism to it.
Wow, that's great. So take us back to your first day at Skywalker Sound. What did you use, feel, or hear that made you go, this is where the best sound in the world gets made, and I'm now part of it?
Well, again, growing up around the film business, having seen, I saw Star Wars when I was too young to remember, but I saw Empire and Raiders, in the theater. And I knew who made the sound for those. So going in there, I knew what I was getting into as far as the caliber. My first day was very overwhelming. When I started, it was before Pro Tools existed. So everything were film machines, dubbers, recorders, projectors, which are large mechanical machines. There's, multiples of them. It's loud. It's kind of daunting. You're physically handling film, physically aligning machines, patch cords, things that don't really exist so much these days. So it was a lot to take in. And I started in the transfer department where you're really dealing with all of these different audio formats. So, it was a steep learning curve, but it also ended up serving basically as my film school. I spent the first 10 years there mostly as a tech, and I really learned the various processes, the different roles, editorial, mixing, the technical side, and obviously Foley.
That's great. So, Sean, we're going to take our first break. I want to play games, this or that. And it's a rapid fire game for the audience to get to know you. Okay, let's go. Zootopia 2 Footsteps or Andor Urban Footsteps?
Andor.
And in some instances, you can say both if you want. So you have a choice.
It's interesting because they're both so different and require such different skill sets and approaches that they both have value to me. They both mean a lot.
Of course. Yeah. F1 pit crew mechanics or Star Wars blaster mechanics?
F1. Those pit scenes were a ton of fun to do.
Yeah. Recording real props or building layered synthetic textures?
Recording real props, I would say, which, is something we do day in and day out. It's fun for us to do design and effects type things, when asked, when the opportunity exists. But the bread and butter of Foley is, feet and, props.
Yeah. Disney animation or Lucasfilm live action?
I'm going to have to say Lucas live action. I am a Star Wars kid.
Yeah. Quiet tension scenes or explosive action sequences?
Both of those things are great. And that's one of the fun things about Foley is that we do get to cover such a range of material and different types of moments in films that they both appeal. And I love the opportunity to do either.
Analog Foley toys or digital tools?
I'm an analog person. As a drummer, Foley artist, it's very, very analog based.
One perfect hero sound or hundreds of invisible micro details?
I say it's the sound that supports the story the most is what I'm looking for.
Late night Foley sessions or early morning Skywalker runs?
It's funny. I worked on the night shift for a long time, and I am a night person, especially being a musician. However, I'm oddly creative in the morning. My mind is very limber at that time, and especially doing footsteps, it's just really comfortable and often easy for me in the morning.
Yeah. Working in giant open Foley rooms or tight dead booth?
Oh, I prefer a traditional Foley stage with some size to it. Absolutely. But you can do it anywhere. I've done Foley in many different capacities.
Yeah. And finally, creating new sounds or reinventing classic ones?
I would say creating new sounds, although I've been very fortunate at Skywalker that there are some heritage sounds and some of those people are still around. And I always consider the history and the canon and how these sounds have been presented in the past when having to sort of repeat existing things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, we're going to jump into another segment from oldest to latest work. Andor, building a grounded Star Wars universe. One of the reasons audiences connected so deeply with Andor because it feels incredibly real and grounded. From a Foley perspective, what were some of the biggest challenges in making a galaxy far, far away sound authentic while still feeling uniquely Star Wars?
Andor is an interesting case because, again, it's the story is so engaging, and that story could exist outside of a Star Wars timeline. That could have been a Game of Thrones type show or something modern like Succession. It's such a sort of timeless story. And the interesting thing about Andor is, in a lot of ways, it's the least Star Wars of Star Wars. You know, there's not the Force, there's not lightsabers. You don't really see stormtroopers until a certain, point in the second season. And so it is very real world to me. And we were given a lot of leeway as far as creating this gritty, often wet, depending on the locations, so the cities are very refined. When they're in certain areas, whether they're in forest, they're very textured. The whole Resistance, those couple episodes with, the Gorman massacre, those are intense. We had a ton of fun making things grittier and dirtier and uglier than we usually get to do in most films, especially Star Wars. So that show meant a lot to me because I loved the story, I loved the acting, and I loved the opportunities we were given to sort of create the feel of Andor.
That's amazing. So for Primetime Emmy nominations, you've earned 4 Primetime Emmys nominations for projects including Andor, Obi-Wan Kenobi, The Book of Boba Fett, and What If. Looking back, which nomination or sound sequence are you most proud of, and what did those recognitions mean to you personally?
Well, it's always great to be recognized. I historically have had mixed feelings about awards for any creative art, whether it's cooking or music, because it's so subjective and there's a certain level of popularity contest sort of thing. But, Andor, I was really hoping we'd win for that just because we put so much into it and we were so proud of it. But all of those shows were a lot of work. All of those shows, we're doing our best work. They sound great. Being, recognized alone is a huge part of it. And actually, earlier this year, I did win a Children and Family Emmy for Star Wars, The Skeleton Crew. So we did win for that, which was nice to be recognized because, again, that was another fun show to work on. For sure. Yeah.
That's great. That's amazing. So Star Wars, The Mandalorian, and Grogu, bringing Star Wars back to theaters. You're not part of Star Wars, The Mandalorian, and Grogu. How does creating Foley for a theatrical Star Wars film differ from working on a streaming series? And what has been the most exciting challenge on this project?
Well, honestly, we treat everything the same. Often the schedule, can be bigger or smaller. Sometimes we get a bigger schedule on an episodic than a feature. It really just depends. But so there's no difference in how I approach it, honestly. Everything I work on, we're trying to make it sound as real, as good as possible. Mandalorian Grogu was a ton of fun for us to do. And Ronnie Brown, who's my Foley partner, she had done the first couple seasons of Mandalorian. So she was really attached to that character. She performed all of his footsteps, the spurs, his armor movement, which allowed me to take on Grogu's character, which was an absolute blast. Creating his footsteps, his cadence, his, all of his different emotional sort of, ranges, whether he's being curious, whether he's being a little feisty. that film was so much fun to work on. And when I finally got to sit down in the theater and watch it, I was, I was sucked in. I wasn't thinking about the sound. I wasn't, thinking about anything other than the story and these characters and the mission that they're on.
That's amazing. So the Punisher, One Last Kill, creating the sound of a vigilante. Marvel's The Punisher, One Last Kill lives in a much grittier and more realistic world. What were the biggest challenges in creating sounds that feel raw, physical, and believable for a character like Frank Castle?
Well, I've always really loved the anti-hero story of the Punisher, the vigilante. So I was excited to get to work on this. And we don't always get to work on things that are really that violent. So, any opportunity to make him sound big, make him sound menacing, powerful, was a fun challenge. I used some heavier shoes than normal. I found myself walking a little harder than normal. We would mic a little closer, just really to bring Frank to the foreground. And a show like that is very physical, all the running, all of the fighting. There's tons of people attacking him from the left and the right. So covering all of those characters' feet were a lot of weapon handling. And Nia Hansen, who is the sound designer and effects editor on it, she did some great weapon stuff where you really can't tell where the Foley ends and the sound effects begin. It's a very full and rich sounding show. There's a lot of cool opportunities where they did a lot of slow motion and a lot of stylized kind of dreamlike moments where we were able to take some liberties. And then there's some, there's a scene where he's walking on the cemetery and the grass to me sounds so amazing. For some reason, like that catches my ear. Grass can be hard to sell the sound of. And, that's one of the more subtle moments of the show. So it's fun to have like that range within, one 45-minute episode.
So you mentioned the grass is hard to create the sound for it. Why is it so hard?
Well,
is it the texture or the?
Yeah, it's a lot of things. I mean, what we think grass sounds like and what grass really sounds like can vary. Historically, we've brought in, sod, and have used real grass. We've used different types of fake grass. We've augmented it with 1/4-inch tape, which is a classic Foley prop where people ball up or cut up 1/4-inch tape and sort of spread it around. There's some other organic materials we use. So, you want to get the weight of the ground without the ground sounding tonal. So you want the weight and maybe hear a little of the dirt kind of underneath, but you want that texture of the grass. It can't be too bright. It can't be too dry, but it has to have enough bite so it reads, so the microphone picks it up. So, and that's with any sound in Foley. We're selling you this sound. We want you to believe it. So even things like wood floors or traditional dirt pits, they can sometimes be hard, to make believable. And a lot of that is performance. A lot of that's miking, mic position. And of course, the mixer is a huge part of, the process as far as perceiving the sound and the performance, equalizing, that type of thing. So, yeah.
That's great. The Super Mario Galaxy movie, building a new universe, then you jump into something completely different with the Super Mario Galaxy. Animation gives sound artists the chance to create words from scratch. How much creative freedom do you have when you're helping invent sounds for a universe that doesn't exist in real life?
In general, we're given a lot of creative freedom on all of our projects because we're being hired because people trust our instincts, our experience. Obviously, we talk to the sound designers and get a sense of their direction. Also, by the time we're working on the Foley, there's sort of what we refer to as a guide track or a temp track that has either been built by the sound department through some temp mixes, or often the picture department kind of creates their own track. So we're given a rough guide of what they're thinking. And our goal is to kind of augment that and bring that to life. And Super Mario, in a lot of ways, was pretty straightforward. I had worked on the first one, which helps. And, we got a sense of what they wanted pretty quickly. It's one of the busiest shows I've ever worked on. And I would say the only character that was kind of a discussion was Yoshi, who is a well-known character in the world, and he's new to this film, to the sequel. And he's very simple and happy-go-lucky. So try to create a character sound for him. We went back and forth a few times on the idea. And once the sound designer heard this particular thing, he was like, that's Yoshi. That's it. So there is a, cool collaborative process there, and there is some give and take. And, sometimes we nail the idea right away, and, sometimes it takes a bit to get there.
That's amazing. Realism versus imagination. When you compare a grounded project like The Punisher to a larger than life animated film like the Super Mario Galaxy movie, how different is your approach as a Foley artist?
Well, I approach everything the same. We are lucky that the picture is our reference, right? You look at the screen and you go, what do you want to hear? And you make the sound and if it's working or not, hopefully. But so I approach everything, with an open mind and, with a sense of what the sound designer or director might be going for. And then we just get into it and go for it and sort of immerse ourselves in that world. And honestly, I try not to overthink it. I think that's a big thing about Foley for me is, I try not to be too literal, and I try not to overthink the process.
So for the F1 movie, you've also worked on F1, directed by Joseph Kosinski, a racing film where sound is everything. How did you approach Foley when the world is full of engines, helmets, suits, pit crews, and physical movement at insane speeds?
Well, that's a fun film because there's, two aspects of it. There's the real world stuff. They go to a bar, they're in offices and hotels. Sonny, he has his kind of lucky deck of cards, which is a reoccurring theme. So it was very fun to work out those more traditional elements. And then we had the opportunity to do stuff we've never done before, with a lot of the race car elements. The pit crew scenes are very fast, but they're also very precise. So everything has to be heavy and big and tight sounding. And very specific. We did all the jacks, all the changing of the wheels, that type of stuff. The crew obviously running around. And then we did a lot of car things that we're normally not asked to do. The thing with F1 cars is they're very, very precise. They don't rattle, they don't squeak, they don't creak. So we can't give them that kind of feel. So we had to try to create a lot of sounds that conveyed weight. If they were dropping the car off the lift, giving it a big, heavy landing. There's also a lot of impacts that happen on the racetrack that we were asked to do elements for. And then everything from, tires bumping and chirping on each other or going over rough spots on the track, gravel hitting, flat tires. There was a lot of fun stuff we got to do in that, which I've never done in a film before.
That's amazing. I had actually on my show, the production sound mixer, Steve Morrow. He was on set recording all the sounds and stuff and mixing. And he mentioned that they didn't have a Ferrari engine. They had like the whole car. And he said that the post-production will need to create the sound because it's not the real sound of the car,
Well, I mean, that's the smoke and mirrors of what we're doing in general. And it's funny because if somebody is very knowledgeable, they might point out like, oh, that's not the right engine. It's like I'm a drummer. So when I'm watching a movie and the drums are set up improperly, I notice that. If you're working on a medical drama and, you're watching it with a doctor, they would go like, oh, that's not real. So that's all of the smoke and mirrors. And we're just, we're doing this for entertainment for sure. It's a matter of telling that story more than it is being literal or realism in many cases.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, he mentioned that because it was very expensive to use Ferrari cars, they had to go. I think they used Volkswagen cars, but he didn't. He mentioned that they didn't record the engine of the car because it's totally different than the Ferrari, so they kept it blank basically for the
Oh,
racing.
interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know our sound designers and supervisors went to many F1 events during the course of that,
Yeah.
and recorded all sorts of stuff,
There you go.
in the real world. So that definitely helps. And those guys are clever. They know how to make it work.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing how things, like how many things there are, and like you layer things to make it work and make it sound professional.
Well, again, and I don't
so-
want people thinking about that. I want them thinking about the story, right?
Yeah,
So if we've done all of that very well, you're just there. You're watching an F1 race. You're not considering
that's true.
how these sounds were made or if they make sense.
Yeah.
So that's
true.
the fun of what we do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So a sound artist can't wait to hear, looking across your recent work, The Mandalorian and Grogu, The Punisher, One Last Kill, the Super Mario Galaxy movie, Andor, and F1. Is there one sound sequence or moment you're especially proud of and excited for audiences to experience?
Well, it's funny. We do so many projects and create so many sounds that I don't necessarily dwell on or retain some of that stuff. I just kind of move on to the next film. I have to say, having just recently watched Mandalorian Grogu in the theater, that there's a point in the film where Mandalorian is kind of down for the count and Grogu has this whole side quest. And that was one of my most fun sequences to create because there's a lot of different textures. He's walking in dirt in the forest on logs. He, gets a little thermos and gets some water and drinks it. There's this whole bug eating sequence, which Ronnie actually did, which is amazing. And during that time, it's very focused on Grogu. There's no dialogue. There's minimal music. The re-recording mixers did a fantastic job of just putting you in this world by playing a lot of Foley. And it's very effective. There's a guy that makes kind of a potion for Grogu to take to the Mandalorian, and the whole sequence of him making this potion, adding different herbs and ingredients, smashing it up, and packaging it was just a ton of fun for me to do. It was a mess to do, all sorts of wet and sticky things, but it just, I don't go to watch a film to listen to my Foley. It's always interesting to see how they use it or if they use it, right? But when the case where it's like it feels featured, felt really good, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. So we're going to take a final break. We're going to play a game, True or False. And it's basically it's to test some facts about your life and career. So true or false, you can say both. It's the same, like this or that, but so let's try it out. So the best Foley is the kind nobody consciously notices. True or false?
True.
True or false, you can instantly hear the difference between custom Foley and a library sound.
I'm gonna say false. People, it's hard these days. Again, sometimes things I work on to tell where my Foley ends and where a sound effect, enters the picture. So if it's done well, you don't notice any of it. I generally notice sound more if it's not working for me.
Yeah.
So I'm still going. I'm going false on that one.
False.
False. Yeah.
True or false, Zootopia 2 required some of the most playful sound experiments you've ever done.
True.
And true or false, Andor's grounded tone made Foley more complex than typical sci-fi.
True.
True or false, F1, the movie needs more sound accuracy than any superhero film you've worked on.
I'd say false. It's so subjective, but you know what? Both. They're both apply. Absolutely. Both probably apply to most of these answers, to be honest. But
Yeah. True or false, your Emmy nominations pushed you to take more creative risks?
well, I'd like to feel that the creative risks are what led to the Emmy nominations, but it is a team effort. So I'll give that both. I'll give it true and false,
True or false, your background as a drummer gives you an unbeatable sense of timing and Foley?
True in most cases. There's sometimes as a drummer, when I'm performing, I'm trying to not sound like a drummer. I'm not wanting to fall into obvious patterns, especially, if we're doing creatures or animals, characters' footsteps, I'm using my hands. There's times where I'm like, I don't want it to be obvious. That said, I can go faster with my hands probably than most of my colleagues because of the drums.
Yeah.
So that definitely helps for sure.
Yeah. True or false, you've reused a single prop in multiple franchises and no one noticed?
Oh, absolutely true. I try to. Yeah, I try to.
Yeah.
Yep.
True or false, animation is sometimes harder than live action because everything must be created from scratch?
True. And also because, besides the fact that a lot of things in animation don't exist in the real world, but even if they're animated humans, they move differently. They don't. You can predict a little bit how a human's going to move. They have weight shifts. They telegraph some of their stuff. Animation, people move on the drop of a dime. They move in unnatural ways, unnaturally fast at times. So animation, is definitely a challenge.
And finally, true or false, you could build a full soundscape from scratch using only the Foley stage and a field recorder?
I'd say that's true. I'd say, but before sound designers existed, I think a lot of that stuff was done on Foley stages, and it still is to this day.
Yeah,
absolutely. Foley stage is a great tool. We can do a lot on there.
We're going to move on to our final segment, process, technology, and future. With tech evolving so fast, Atmos, AI tools, bigger sound libraries, what part of Foley will always require a human performer physically creating sound in real time?
Well, it is the human element. One, I feel in most cases we can do it faster than someone trying to, either cut sounds in or, some other process. But there's also, again, it's the human element. It's the performance. It's the, we're acting. It's the randomness of being human is something that, is hard to manufacture. And, this goes, growing up a drummer, I've been told always I would be replaced by a machine, or samples or, right.
Yeah.
And Foley has always had that too. They tried to do Foley with synclaviers, with keyboards, with MIDI triggers, with libraries. And, it may work in certain contexts, but it seems much more cumbersome to me. And the end result doesn't seem to be nearly as interesting or good, to be perfectly honest. So I try not to fear technology.
Yeah. So when you're building a scene, what's your personal rule? Do you focus on realism first, or do you go with emotional truth, especially in something stylized like animation or something intense like racing?
Well, it's always the story. And because we're asked, a large portion of the material we're making is kind of the human element, the human interaction. It's a feel thing. It's always the story. The story wins. So I'm always emotional truth would, be the answer to that for sure.
Yeah. For young artists who want to follow your path from curious kid to Skywalker Sound Foley artist, what's the clearest roadmap can you give them? Or you wish somebody told you when you were going through your career?
Well, it's interesting because when I started doing Foley, the exposure to, the general public, as it were, was very different. Like, how did people learn about Foley prior to the internet, prior to podcasts? I mean, there was, I guess the DVDs would have maybe a special edition that showed Foley. So one thing that's nice is there's more resources than ever. There's schools that, teach post-production, that touch on Foley, so I think that's something that I didn't have, exposure to. And, if you want to be a Foley artist, I wish you luck. It's a very hard job to learn. It's hard to get good at. It's hard to break into. If you can get, a foot in the door at any sort of audio facility that's doing Foley, even if you're, the runner or receptionist, craft services, getting that foot in the door, getting that exposure, meeting Foley artists, that's all, the opportunities that, I would pursue. I do think it's hard to learn because, again, we, being literal and doing things that are realistic don't always work, don't always sound good. The other thing is, you have to learn you have to learn what good sounds are, how to make them, but we have to do them fast, and we have to do them faster than ever. And I think that's, something that makes it a little harder to break into and learn. But, you can build your own Foley stage in your garage and download your favorite clips for movies and start walking on them and cutting them and, trying to figure out how to make it work, So I think there's a lot of resources that people are fortunate to have.
So mentioned you have to be faster. Is it because of the budget, or I guess
it's
streaming is faster budget?
It's interesting. I don't want to say budgets are arbitrary, but they don't necessarily always correlate to how busy a project is or how long a project is. I mean, that's a consideration, but, budgets are what they are. And, we have so many days to do a project. And maybe in the 90s, Foley might have had 25 days on your average show. And that's turned more into, 20, sometimes 15. And we're not necessarily being asked to do any less amount of work. If you look at something like Super Mario or Zootopia, we didn't have extremely long schedules, and they are very busy. And we covered a ton of material in there. And, we don't want to leave any bad performances or bad sounds.
Course,
I'd rather not make a sound than put a bad sound in there. So that's where, getting fast is important. Being able to get a performance in a couple takes and have it be a great performance just takes time.
Yeah. So the effort is still the same, but it shrank, like the duration shrank. So you still have to do the same thing, but a shorter period.
Yes, in general, I mean,
In terms of
because of
effort,
technology, sometimes they will reuse and recycle some sounds we've established in a film. Sometimes they will cut some stuff in from a library, depending on what it is. There was a time where it felt like Foley was making all the sounds, and then effects were making all of the same sounds, and somewhere down the road had to pick or choose which were working or how they work together. And nowadays, especially with streaming, they don't have as much time to make those decisions. I think streaming has shorter mix times, for the re-recording mixers. And I think that's the place where, the Foley has to be the right thing and ready to go, because they don't have a lot of options as to what they can do with it. So they either play it or they don't. With feature films, they generally still get to do a Foley premix, where they get to make some of those decisions in advance, and they have a little more time on their end to address the Foley along with the rest of the mix.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. So, and finally, Sean, do you have any dream project you've done? You got Emmys. You worked on big blockbuster films and movies. Is there anything you haven't done you'd like to do?
Well, I feel real fortunate because, like you mentioned, I have worked on a lot of amazing projects, and a lot of projects that meant a lot to me. I don't get to work on as much horror films as I would like to be perfectly honest. From a Foley standpoint, that stuff is a ton of fun, and comedies, real true comedies.
Mhm.
Again, they both lend themselves, to Foley in a way that I
Mhm.
enjoy. And while I've done some, we don't get a ton of that coming through us. So, and I like indie films. I like weird movies, although I
Yeah.
watch, mainstream films and always have, and I watch a lot of films I work on. I definitely gravitate towards watching, something Neon or Blumhouse or,
Yeah.
A24 put out. I'm always, checking that stuff out. So
Yeah.
send it my way.
Okay. So Sean, what's next for you? Is there anything, first, can you talk about your upcoming projects? Is there anything you can talk about?
Unfortunately, I can't, and I would really like to because we have some great stuff coming up this year. I will mention the latest thing I worked on that's releasing is X-Men 97 Season 2,
Mhm.
and that's Disney Plus streaming, comes out July 1st. And I worked on the first season as well, and it's 90s two-dimensional style animation, very stylized. And I loved working on season 1. As much as I know about Marvel stuff, I don't know a ton about the X-Men. I didn't watch those shows, 30 years ago. And, they're great, and they were so well received, and they were fun to do because the animation's so stylized. You really have to
Mhm.
not be literal, and you really have to try to figure out how to, walk these characters and perform these characters that makes sense. So it was actually a very, very challenging show, I think, for everybody because they're really busy. But that'll be coming out,
Mhm.
and people are already talking about it, which is a good thing.
That's amazing. That's exciting. So Sean, we're nearing the end of the show. That's all, folks. Thank you for watching. Sean England, everyone. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thank you.